And good day to you and welcome to today's session. Today what we're going to be doing is taking a look at settlement geography, doing some preparation on some techniques that we can apply to an exam session and hopefully get you prepared for that big exam that's coming up. So let's take a look at what we've got in store for us. Settlement geography. It's a big section. There's lots of detail in it, and so how is the examiner going to put across all of that information to us? Surely he's not going to ask us every single thing. Well, that may be the case, but we've got to study every single thing in case those questions come up. But not everything's going to be a great big question. Some of it will be answered in terms of definitions, some match the columns, something in the way of multiple choice, sentences, and then up to the paragraphs. But if we can get an idea of all of our work beforehand, we can apply it quite easily to each question as it comes up. Let's take a look at some of our cheats or checklists as we go along. So first up, make sure you know the following. You should be able to identify and discuss definitions of settlement terms, their functions, site, situation, and so on and so forth. Those are usually at the beginning of your section because they lay out all the definitions of the words that we're going to be applying later on. We should also be able to discuss the structure of settlements. Now, not every settlement is the same, but they all have the basic pattern in terms of layout. And that is something that will be applied to all settlements and will affect all people in those settlements. We should also be able to identify and discuss the relationships between the people and those settlements, because it's the interaction between people and space that geographers are really interested in. Finally, you should have an understanding of how to work with a map of South Africa. Even if you aren't able to sketch one yourself, you should be able to work with one in order to apply your answers. Let's take a look at that. So here we have a map of South Africa. Now, if we apply it to our settlement situation, we should be able to have an understanding of where our major settlements are. So if we take a look at things like this, we would know that Gauteng is our major area of settlement, the highly densely populated area with all of our industries. Durban, down in KwaZulu-Natal. Richards Bay, an industrial port. And then as we move further south, we will find places like East London, Port Elizabeth, and Cape Town in the southwestern Cape. Now, by being familiar with this pattern, we can immediately give ourselves a little bit of a step up in terms of understanding the settlement in South Africa. We know where the people are going to be living. Now let's take a look at a past paper. The questions are going to be fairly similar to anything that you're likely to face, and so while they won't be the same, they will give us a little bit of a pattern to follow in your preparation for that exam. So question 1 says the following. Refer to figure 1, which shows a variety of settlements and land use zones. Well, that's good news because we've already understood from our definitions about the land use zones, so we should be looking for them now. Match the letters A to E in the figure with the descriptions below. Well, before we even get to those descriptions, let's take a look at the picture itself. We've got our letters A and B up in the top left-hand corner, C over here, D over here, and E in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, can we identify now even what these things are before looking at the question? If you can, fantastic, you've got to step up. But let's take a look at our options next. First up, they're asking us for an informal settlement. Well, let's take a look back and see if we can find an informal settlement. Certainly, there's nothing up in this area. Informal settlements, generally speaking, are found close to the cities, on the edge of the city. So if we look on the edge of the city, can you find it? Here it is, Area D. So 1.2 is asking us to identify a dispersed rural settlement. Let's go back to the picture and see if we can find it. If we look up here, we've got areas A and B already highlighted. We've got area C out here. Now that's a new one. If you look at it, we've got a farmhouse all by itself and nothing else around it. Area C looks to be our one. And sure enough it is. 1.3 asks us to look for a traditional settlement. Now traditional settlements are those belonging to the indigenous population. Let's take a look at the picture again. Looking at this picture, we've got area A, area B, C, D, and E. D and E are definitely not the questions we're looking for. We're looking for a traditional settlement out in the rural areas. Area C is taken up already, so it's either A or B. Which one looks like a traditional African settlement to you? Area A, correct. Let's take a look and see. Sure enough it is. The central business district. This one's fairly straightforward. We've got to find it in the city. Looking at this picture, our city down in the corner here, where area D and E are, there's only one option. It's got to be area E, because that's where we've got our high-rise buildings. Sure enough, there it is. Finally, question 1.5, a nucleated rural settlement. So that is a settlement out in the countryside, but one that is closely packed together. That means we're looking out here at area B. And there it is, 10 marks, just as easy as you like, simply by knowing your definitions. Moving along to question 2. Question 2 says, study figure 2, which shows land use in an urban area. So that means we've got to take our understanding of urban settlements, forget about rural, just deal with the urban settlements, and the land use zones, take it into this question. What have we got here? We have got a whole bunch of labels, and the examiner always puts in labels because he's going to refer to them in his questions. So it's a good idea to take note of things like the CBD, a regional shopping centre, a green belt, a golf course, transport routes like the railway line and the main road, the airport. And then you'll also notice that as we move away from the city, we're moving out into the rural areas. These are all things that we need to take note of before we get into the question itself. Let's just clear up all the mess that we've made before we take a look at our questions themselves and then see about answering them. Question 2.1. Describe one characteristic of the CBD. And if we take a look at our mark allocation, they're only looking for 2 marks out of that single point. So just one thing about the CBD. And if you look back to your notes, you'll remember that there are stunning examples of lots and lots of things about the CBD. Things like, and let's go back to the picture. High-rise buildings. The fact that all of our routes, our transport routes, converge on the central business district. The fact that we are going to find a high value of land in this area because of the demand, because of the competition that people want in order to trade in that particular area. So if we can just find one of those points, put it in, and we've got our answer. So here we go. We've mentioned the high building density or intensive land use, the fact that because land is so expensive, everybody's going to make sure they use it to its optimum potential. The tallest buildings, the fact that we've got our high-rise office blocks there, with the owners of those buildings maximizing their rentals because of the expense that they've had to shell out in buying the land in the first place. High land values, as we've just said, will lead to those high rentals. We've also mentioned, and this was in the definition, central business district. Tells you something straight away. It's in the middle. It's highly accessible because of the transport routes that go into the beginning, into the middle of it. Convergence is another way to describe that. It's generally speaking the oldest part of our city. And this is because that was where the market started right at the very beginning of the city being established. As time goes by, you're likely to find that there will be high traffic congestion. And this might actually lead to people moving away, but that's another question entirely. And because of all that congestion, you are likely to find a huge amount of pollution, both in terms of air and noise, as well as litter. Of course, because of all the people going in there to work, there will also be a high amount of pedestrian traffic. Let's move on. 2.2. State one factor that would have influenced the location of the regional shopping centre. Let's go back to the diagram and have a look. Now, our regional shopping centre can be found, pardon me, over here. Now we can see that it is a good ways out from the central business district. It's not in the CBD, it's away from it. Regional shopping centres are designed to allow a motorist shopper in particular access to a wide variety of shops and services without the congestion of going into the CBD. So when you're putting up a regional shopping centre, you're going to be looking for space, and that we can certainly see around it. We also need to have transport links close by. The main road is very close by to it. And we also need to have, of course, customers, people who are going to come to the shopping centre in order to purchase their goods. So we need to have residential areas fairly close by. That's what we'd be looking for. Let's move down and take a look. Sure enough, we're close to the main road for accessibility. It's close to the residential areas, and there is enough space for parking and for that regional shopping centre to expand further if it does so. The only place that they can find land that is cheap enough for them to purchase such a large amount will be on the outside of the city, on the outskirts. So that's another thing that we could have added in. Happily, they were asking for one factor. We've come up with 3 or 4, which certainly hedges our bets. Let's move on to 2.3. 2.3 asks us to give a brief description of the rural-urban fringe. Now, when we look at that terminology, rural-urban, they've put a little hyphen in the middle indicating that the words are joined, so therefore the concepts are joined as well. We're talking about an area that has got both rural and urban functions, hence the term rural-urban, but it's on the outskirts of the city, which is why it's on the fringe. So if we take a look at our picture again, our rural-urban fringe is going to be on the outside of the city here. The main city, of course, is in the middle, but the rural-urban fringe is on the outside, where there is a mixture of urban functions, and there's still space here for rural functions. Let's clean this up a little bit. The rural-urban fringe, then, is that zone or area, the zone that is found on the outskirts of our city with mixed functions. Things like nurseries, golf courses, shooting ranges. But you'll also find some residential areas as the city expands. Let's look at 2.4. 2.4 says recreational facilities are commonly found in the rural-urban fringe. Recreation, of course, refers to having a good time, relaxing, some sports, some relaxational activities that can be carried out. Question 2.4a says, give evidence from the diagram to support that statement that recreational facilities are found in this area. Let's look at the diagram. Once again, our rural-urban fringe is in this area, beyond the city itself. And if we look, we can see a golf course, we can see a caravan park, there is a river here that says private fishing, all three of which are good examples of recreational activities. And sure enough, here we have them, the golf course, the caravan site, the fishing, but not forgetting the green belt or the park and the airport itself. Question B is a follow-on question. It leads out of question A. Why are the recreational facilities mentioned in this question found in the rural-urban fringe? Let's take a look at them again. We're talking about all of these. The golf course, the caravan site, fishing, a greenbelt and an airport. One thing that really comes to mind immediately is the fact that a lot of these things, like the golf course, the caravan site and the airport, need a lot of space. The only place where you're going to find space is outside the city. In addition, the airport is very noisy. The people living in the city aren't going to enjoy having aircraft taking off and landing over their heads all the time. They're going to want to put that into the outskirts. Sure enough, we're looking for flat land, we're looking for open space and expansion, the available resources like the river, plus the fact that out there, it's actually away from the city itself. It's a tranquil, peaceful atmosphere. Once again, they were only looking for 1 point. We've got 3 or 4 to choose from. Question 2.5. Describe one way in which industries have been located in the rural-urban fringe, how they impact negatively on the environment. So we need to take a look at the negative impact of industry on the environment. Fairly straightforward if you think about it. Industries take up a lot of space, take up a lot of water, but what else do? They give off lots of pollution. If they're involved in combustion, there's going to be a lot of air pollution. There's going to be a lot of water pollution from any waste that they dump outside. So these are problems facing the rural-urban fringe because of industry. Sure enough, here we have it. The 3 types of pollution that they've mentioned that affect the physical environment: air, land, and water pollution. But there's also noise pollution, because those big industries make a lot of noise in their production processes. And of course, in some areas, they're actually going to wipe out the entire area of land because of all the nasty chemicals they're using to produce those products for us. 2.6. Discuss 2 plans that the local government or city council, municipality, can use to correct the damage caused by those industries. This is quite an easy one. All we need to do is go back to our answers in the previous question and say, how do we fix it? In the case of air pollution, we would be looking at something like a filter. A set of filters put into the combustion stacks of those factories, which would filter out some of the pollution that is going to be going into the air. Water pollution, similar things. They need to treat the water, put it through a system of filters to make sure that the water they pump out into either the sewers or the rivers is cleaner than what they've made it. Noise pollution is a little bit trickier. What they're going to need to do there is try and limit perhaps their operating hours, that it doesn't destroy the natural environment around there 24/7. And in terms of the destruction of the land, after they've done their products, after they've used the area, they're going to need to put it back to, or restore it to, its original condition. So we're talking about things like planting trees, putting in green belts, putting in parks and recreational areas. There's a whole bunch of things that we can look at here. In terms of air pollution, electricity saving campaigns. As you know, in South Africa, most of our electricity comes from coal-fired power stations. That produces a lot of combustion and air pollution. So if we can cut down on our electricity or go to cleaner sources of electricity, that will help us a lot. A lot of the things that we're going to be talking about here will be punitive, that is, punishment type things. So for example, the government could impose controls and fines for people polluting the area. They could then use that money to repair the area. In terms of land pollution, again, we're looking at issuing fines for things like illegal dumping, establishing waste management agencies. These would be companies that are involved in recycling and cleaning up after the waste of the industries that have made the waste in the first place. Water pollution, again, we're coming back to the story of fines for industries dumping toxic waste into the water, and we regulate all of these things through laws, regulations, and legislation. As far as noise pollution is concerned, one thing we can do is put in a green belt to cushion out the noise. Now, a green belt is an area of land that is left natural. And even if that means we go and we create a natural area like a forest or an area of grassland that creates a buffer zone between the industrial area and any residential area, that will go to some way to reducing our levels of noise pollution. Let's move on to 2.7. (2.7) says, name one way in which the greenbelt land that we've just been talking about and the Oak Green Woods Country Park can play a role in the sustainable development of the rural-urban fringe. Now, if you remember in your notes, sustainable development refers to economic development, that's money for all of us humans, but not at the expense of the environment. It's a program that will allow the environment to thrive as well as our economic well-being. So what we're talking about here is putting in a green belt like a country park that will make money, but at the same time will keep the landscape as natural as possible for the enjoyment of everybody. So a green belt like that, once again, will reduce our air pollution or carbon footprint. It provides oxygen and wildlife in that area. It will, of course, by putting in that extra vegetation, prevent against soil erosion. And overall, because we're putting in the green belt, we're working against global warming. So all of those things together point towards us improving our natural environment, but the fact that it's a country park implies that people are paying in order to come there. So there's an economic advantage as well. Let's move on to our next question. Question 3. Now this is a straightforward one. They ask us to match the sketches below with the descriptions provided. Straightforward, match the columns. Let's take a look-see. We've got all of our pictures, 1 through 5 on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we've got the descriptions. But I do notice that we have got an extra letter. So we've got an extra option. One of these options is going to be left out somewhere along the line. It's not as straightforward as just straightforward elimination. Let's get rid of that circle. So question 1, 3.1, we can see is our gridiron pattern. It's something that is familiar to us if we've studied our CBD. It's the pattern that they apply to central business districts simply because it's the easiest way to lay out a city in terms of division of land. Let's take a look at our options. Is it a star-shaped settlement? Definitely not. It's not a settlement with a semicircular shape. Area C, answer C says, has many stop streets and robots. That's an option. Further down, it allows for the smooth flow of traffic. Not always. If you've been traveling in a CBD, you'll know that. Urban profile, it definitely is not, and it's not a cross-shaped settlement. Our best answer for this one is Area C. It has many stop streets and robots. typical of the grid pattern. 3.2. Now we can see here that we've got an area of roads that are irregular in pattern. Is it a star shape? No, it's not. Is it a semicircular? No, it's not. It can't be question answer C. We've already ticked that one off. It could be D, because that allows for the smooth flow of traffic. It's definitely not E, because a profile is a side view, and it is not a cross-shaped settlement. So our answer for 3.2 is definitely D. It allows for the smooth flow of traffic. Question 3.3 is a side view of the city. We've got the ground at the bottom, we've got the buildings at the top here. Side view means profile. That was an answer we saw earlier. Here it is, answer E, the urban profile. Question 3.4 asks us to take a look, and here we've got the sea with the coastline here, and the shape of our settlement is like this. Not quite a perfect circle, in fact only half of one. It's a semicircle, which we remember is up here, answer B, settlements that have a semicircular shape. That should then leave us with two answers for the last question. 3.5 asks us, is this a cross, our options in terms of the answer are F, a cross-shaped settlement, or A, a star-shaped settlement. Let's take a look at the roads, because it's the roads that will give the settlement its shape. We can clearly see here it's not a cross shape, it's definitely got a star shape, so that gives us answer A. That brings us to the end of question 3. We're going to take a little break now, and we'll see you afterwards. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed a good break. Let's get stuck in again. Question number 4. Question 4 asks us to study the table below, which illustrates the changing distribution of the world's urban population over the last 60 years. Well, let's take a look at the table before we look at the questions, because it'll give us a lot of information in anticipating those questions. What have we got here? It's urban population, but it's also critically looking at developed and developing countries over a period of years. That's obviously somewhere where they're going. They want to ask us about the patterns of urban population in those countries. Let's just clear that a little bit and then get into the questions themselves. Question 4.1 says, comment on the trend is another word for pattern, on the urban population percentage for developed countries over the past 60 years. So let's take a look-see. So we're looking at just the developed countries. What's the pattern that we can see here? The numbers, as we go through the years, are coming down. They're decreasing. So what that's telling us is that in developed countries, the rate of, or the percentage of urban population is decreasing. Question B asks us to give a possible explanation for the trend mentioned in our previous question. They're asking us why our urban population in those developed countries is decreasing. It's fairly straightforward. What's happened is that over the centuries in those developed countries, you've had rural to urban migration all the time, but now the city's actually getting too full. The economies of those countries is fully developed, and you now get a process called counter-urbanization, where people actually start leaving the cities and start heading for the quieter rural areas. So, as we've said, our developed countries are already highly urbanized. Also, the urbanization process is still going strong in our developing countries, what they used to call the third world countries. So the ratio between urbanization of developing and developed countries is changing very much in favor of the developing countries becoming more urbanized. Further on, the growth of information technology. your computers, the internet, etc. The fact that you can now work from home wirelessly means that you don't have to stay in the city at all. You can work wherever you like in the world, but particularly outside the city at the home of your choice. Also, the availability and efficiency of transport means that people can live far away from where they work, but because the transport is so good at getting them into work and out again on time, means that they don't have to live inside the cities itself. The other answers, possible answers that we could offer are the nasty ones. The fact that we've got pollution, traffic congestion, all those uglies that make it uncomfortable to live in the city, and so people want to leave. Better services in the rural areas of developed countries. And finally, of course, the lower population growth in developed countries. If you remember from grade 10 when we studied population, we know that in developed countries, their population growth rates are much smaller, and correspondingly, the rate of urbanization is smaller as well. Question 4.2. What is the term used to describe the trend or pattern where an increasing number of people live in urban areas? Very straightforward, that one. It's urban growth, the growth of urban places. Question 4.3. They're asking us to discuss 2 economic push factors that encourage people to leave the rural areas. So 2 ugly things that'll make people want to go. That could be things like unemployment caused by drought, crime in the rural areas, anything that is unpleasant that will get you out. 2 answers for that will get you your 4 marks. Things like low salaries, a poor standard of living, deteriorating facilities and infrastructure. Infrastructure refers to things like roads, rail, communication lines, transport, and so on. All the things that make the structure of the settlement that we're dealing with. The consolidation of farms, the fact that some farms actually get joined together, so 2 or 3 farms get joined into one big farm, and what they do is they lay off some of the workers from all 3 farms. Where are those people going to go? They have to move off to the city in the hopes of finding work. High production costs, again, would mean that people are no longer happy in the rural areas and they move out. Point of caution though, with this particular question, they're only looking for the push factors. They're looking for the uglies in the rural areas, not the things in the city that are attractive. Those, remember, are pull factors. Only give them the push factors in this case. Question 4.4. The increase in the urban population percentage in developing countries has created deterioration in city centres, a term that we refer to as urban blight. In a paragraph of approximately 12 lines, suggest ways in which the local government or city council can solve the problem. So they've given us an idea of how much they're looking for in the mark allocation. They want 6 points, but they want it in a paragraph, so we're going to need to write it out fairly neatly. So we're looking for ways in which to improve the city. The city, as they've mentioned, is being blighted. Now, blight means slum-like, deterioration, breakdown. So the physical structure of the buildings, the streets, and of the neighborhoods is actually starting to fall into disrepair. There's lots of pollution, there's lots of litter. The buildings are not being well maintained. There's probably high levels of crime. All of these things contribute to the city looking ugly. So what they're asking us is, how can we, as the local government, solve the problem? We need to find ways to reverse those things. So if we've mentioned crime as a problem, we can say, well, let's have more police, have more patrols, more CCTV cameras. That will cause the crime rate to reduce, and we'll be improving our blight. Or rather, making the blight better. Other things that we need to look at. Some of those buildings are breaking down. Some of them so much that they are beyond repair. What we can do then is clean them out completely, demolish them, and rebuild a new, modern urban structure. That will attract more people back into the city. Another thing that we can look at is, in order to keep the style of the city, because some of those cities have got wonderful architecture, but we just need to upgrade it a little bit. So what we can do is do some repairs, some renovation. And in some cases, we just change the pattern of the city by keeping the existing building and putting a brand new wall on the outside to make it look all sparkly clean. That's a process that we call facadism. Let's take a look at the suggested answers and see if any of those have come up. Yes, indeed. Some of these are quite extreme. Slum clearance. A slum, as we've said, is an area where, in this case, a residential area that might be overcrowded, where the services of water, sewerage, waste disposal and so on are poor or non-existent. So the option there is demolish the houses and rebuild new ones, or move those people into other flats in other areas. Regeneration, that means to renovate the old buildings, bring them back up to the former high standard of their original condition, and also build new offices and houses in the area to attract people and investment. This will also create job opportunities and will improve people's general quality of life. Inner city renewal, renovating or demolishing the buildings, as we've said, and that enables economic and social growth. The idea behind this is to attract new businesses back to the CBD, because if you remember, the CBD was the original starting point of the city. When it goes through the urban cycle and crime and blight start to affect it, people leave that area. What we're trying to do is improve it so that those people and businesses will come back to that area and reinvest. Here's what we were talking about, invasion and succession. That is the area where we get one function invading and changing. So for example, businesses invading into residential areas, taking over, and residential areas becoming commercial based. Gentrification or chalcification, these are two, let me just clean that up for you. Gentrification or chalcification, this is a term given when we invest heavily in an area and upgrade it. And you might have guessed that the term chalcification comes from the region in London, Chelsea, where it happened first. Facadism, I referred to earlier, is where you take an existing building and put a new outer covering onto it, make it look good, but keeping the existing architecture inside. Finally, in terms of general solutions, crime prevention, like CCTV cameras, better patrols by the police, improved public transportation, something along the lines of an integrated transport network of buses and trains, and of course, critically, the improved maintenance of all of those infrastructure systems. So improving and maintaining your transport, electricity, your sewage and waste disposal units. And a larger workforce will enable all of this to take place. And of course, it has the added benefit of giving people jobs, employment, giving them money that they can go and spend, and thus stimulate the economy as well. Finally, two punitive things. We can impose fines and laws on people who are breaking those laws and making the city look bad. Question number 5. Figure 5 highlights some of the ways in which pollution occurs on the Earth's surface. Let's take a look at the picture. So here we go, and the examiner's been very generous again, given us a whole bunch of labels to look for. These are going to be coming up in our questions just now. Let's take a look. 5.1, identify one cause of air pollution in the diagram. Very straightforward. We've got a whole bunch of them, but straightforward. Here's our pollution coming out of our factories. We've also got a nice big vehicle here. That's going to be pouring pollution into the air. We've also got an informal settlement. Don't forget, those guys generally don't have electricity linked into the houses, so they're going to be burning stuff. 3 options, any of which will be correct. Toxic emissions from industries, exhaust gases from the cars, and you can also have domestic combustion. 5.2, suggest one effect of air pollution and its likely impact evident on the diagram. Guys, what we need to make sure is when they say to us evident on the diagram means we have to refer to the diagram. We have to take something out and put it into our answer to show that we've looked at the diagram. Let's go back and have another look quickly. So what we've got is pollution having an effect on the environment. You can see definitely here we've got some acid rain. Now acid rain, if you recall, comes from the fact that we've got our industries and our vehicles giving off combustion into the atmosphere. Those particles go into the water, into the clouds, and contaminate the water. The water itself becomes acidic. When it falls onto the land again, it's going to actually start eating into our vegetation. And that process, because you've got water that is acidic, obviously acid rain. Let's clean up our diagram. We're going to be coming back to it again. And here we are, confirming our answer. We've got acid rain stunting the growth of plants. We also have ozone depletion. Now, ozone, remember, is that gas found in the stratosphere, the second layer of our atmosphere, that protects us from UV radiation from the sun. Ozone has been slowly depleting over the past couple of decades, and what that will do is allow more UV radiation into the atmosphere. We're going to be causing increased rates, particularly of skin cancer as a result. 5.3. Informal settlements. That would be settlements that have no formal structure. It's those settlements that have been largely built by the people themselves out of whatever material they can find. There was no architect, no town and regional planner. There's generally no electricity and water provided in each house. It's literally every person for themselves. An informal settlements, I beg your pardon, are common on the banks of rivers in South Africa. These informal settlements also contribute to pollution on the Earth's surface. So they've asked us first up, what are informal settlements? As I described it earlier, illegally built settlements made from a variety of materials. Generally speaking, the people living in those settlements don't own the land upon which the settlement is built. It belongs to somebody else. But because it's open, they take the opportunity and they build there because that's the only place they've got to go. Coming out of that, why do informal settlements develop on the banks of rivers? As I said earlier, there's no services provided to those settlements, so they're looking for water and electricity and power for themselves. Generally speaking, they're going to go out and burn trees or cut down trees and burn wood in order to cook for themselves. They're going to need to get water from somewhere. The river is close by, so that is why they're going to build on the banks of the rivers. And there we have it, to have easy access to water for domestic purposes like cooking. Land that is generally available as there is no great demand for it. It's wide open. You generally don't find people living on the banks of rivers except for informal settlements. Question C. State one problem excluding pollution. So that's one we can't go to, that these settlements located on the riverbanks cause. Well, one of the problems is that by building so close to the river, very often they built below what we call the 50-year flood line. It's a line drawn on a map, basically, where over 50 years we have studied the average flood level of a particular river, and we've said, look, don't build below that area because you're going to get flooded. Unfortunately, informal settlements, people are desperate for a place to live, and they will go and build in areas below that. The worry is, of course, when they do get flooded, those houses and people get washed away. By building on those river banks, they also contribute to soil erosion. So valuable topsoil on those riverbanks is taken away. In addition, natural vegetation is taken away. Remember, we spoke about the fact that trees get chopped down in order to provide fuel for firewood for those places. The entire ecosystem then is going to be affected So all the wild animals, the aquatic life in that river are going to be affected by people living there. And the fact that there is no services like sewers taking away human waste, we're going to see the spreading of disease through that water channel. Question D. Discuss 2 methods used in South Africa to reduce the number of informal settlements. So we're looking for ways to give people proper housing, basically. So here we have it. Post-apartheid, we had the Reconstruction and Development Program. And it was an initiative by the government whereby they invested in low-cost housing in areas that needed housing desperately. And so what happened is informal settlements got moved out, and these low-cost houses were built, and the people that had been staying in the informal settlement were now given these houses. A self-help scheme is a lot better. It's not just a case of handing something over to somebody. You get the buy-in of the people at grassroots level. So you train, for example, the local population on how to build bricks, how to make bricks, which of course they can then use to construct their own houses. It's much, much better than just saying to them, look, you know, you build it out of what you want. And so as a result, they will go with whatever's available, like wood, corrugated tin, plastic, and so on. A self-help scheme provides employment as well as housing. Relocation is a bit of a tricky one. People are living in a particular area, often because it's close to their work. Now government come along and just move them out and move them somewhere else. It is a solution because it does reduce the informal settlements, but it is a contentious one. Site and service, what this means is the site is the actual piece of ground upon which the settlement is built. So what happens is government will buy up a patch of land from somebody and create it there and then allow people to go and move in. They will often provide services to those areas in the form of water, sewage, and electricity. Our last section for today, question 6. Figure 6, an article and a map, is based on industrial activity in the Durban area. This is why it's a good idea to have an understanding of the map of South Africa, so that you know where Durban is. So we have the article here, South Africa's environmental justice struggles against toxic petrochemical industries in South Africa, in southern Durban. Now, we would need to read through all of this in your question, in your exam. This case study explores the South Durban community's struggle against exposure to a hazardous environment and sulfur dioxide pollution. In total, the South Durban area contains over 120 industries. This petrochemical basin, what they're talking about there is an area where petrochemical industries have all been located, has been dubbed the Durban poison, which overburdens low-income communities with environmental stress like pollution and public health costs. Apartheid spatial planning cited black residential areas near these industries in order to facilitate easy access to cheap labor. Generally, these townships, and they've named a few here, were located within close proximity to toxic dumps, sewage treatment plants, and polluting industries. Okay. And here we've got our map showing us what's going on there. Up in this area, we've got the small version, so we've got Durban, the Indian Ocean, and Pinetown. But they've blown it up over here on the right-hand side to show us that these grey areas, such as Bluff over here, those are the areas where we've got the petrochemical industries, whereas these spotted areas, as per the key, are our residential areas. Let's just clean that up so that we can use it better. Question 6.1. Most of the industries located to the harbour are bridge industries. What are bridge industries? Bridge industry is not involved in construction of transport links across a river. No, this bridging is referring to something else. It's referring to the fact that we're putting industries in between the raw materials and the consumers, in between the minerals that we're using and the people that are going to be using them. Sure enough, bridge industries are industries located next to the source of the raw material and the consumers. 6.2. Why can the Durban harbour be described as a break of bulk point? This goes back to the very beginning where we said we need to understand our definitions. A break of bulk point is an area where we change from one mode of transport to another. For example, from road to train, or from train to ship. Durban harbour, they're asking why is it described as a break of bulk point? Fairly straightforward. We're changing our mode of transport in Durban. Goods are moved from one mode to the other, in this case most likely from rail into the port onto the ships, or vice versa. It's an importing and exporting industry. 6.3. Why is the location of the industries seen to be a social injustice? Now this is a question referring back to the text that we had previously. Let's go back and take another look. They spoke about, over here they've said that the residential areas were located near the industries to facilitate easy access to cheap labour, but that those residential areas were also within close proximity of toxic dumps, sewage treatment plants and polluting industries. Imagine living next to a sewage plant, next to an industry that is pumping poison into the air and into your water. That's the injustice. The injustice is that apartheid planners have placed people that they don't necessarily care about next to these toxins. 6.4. State why this area is ideal for the location of oil refineries. Well, we need to have a bit of an understanding of where we get our oil from. Unfortunately, South Africa is not one of those countries that has oil under its own ground. We have to import it from somewhere. Generally speaking, that's the Middle East, up to the north and east of Africa. So the best place, therefore, to put our oil refineries will be those entry points into South Africa, which of course means that Durban and its harbour is ideal for this particular industry type. 6.5. Evaluate the importance of industrial activity for the economy of KwaZulu-Natal. And something we should note here is the mark allocation. They're looking for 3 points here. So we need to come up with 3 good things. Well, if you think about it, industrial activity does a number of things for us. Number 1, it provides employment for people working in those industries. Number 2, provides products that's good for export, and thus we can get money back from those other countries. It also provides an area for investment from overseas. So all of these things will go into uplifting the economy of KwaZulu-Natal. So as we've said, it generates income, it creates jobs. What that does is, by having income and employment, people are then able to take that money, go and buy other products. It has a knock-on effect. By buying other products, you're supporting other industries. Those other industries can employ more workers. Employing more workers means those workers have money. Those workers then go and buy more products, and so on and so on and so on. You're also, by having more money, improving the standard of living for people, so they can improve their houses, better infrastructure and so on. Foreign exchange is a lot better because by selling our products overseas, we can get foreign currency coming here, and it helps with our current account balance. As a contribution to GDP, remember gross domestic product as the value of all goods and services produced by a country in 1 year, and it's seen as a bit of a value that indicates the development of that country. So the higher the better. The more industries you've got, the higher the GDP will be. It also provides a market for our raw materials. Our farmers and our miners now have industries to feed into. They will be selling their goods to those industries. Again, the knock-on effect going back to those raw material suppliers. It will improve infrastructure. By having industries means that we have to improve our transport, our electricity, our water pipelines in that area. That, of course, is a benefit to everybody. Finally, the fact that you've got workers in those factories means that they're going to be educated better to do the skilled tasks required in that area. They're also going to, by earning more, going to contribute to the tax base of the country. Now, tax isn't always a bad thing. We need to be able to give tax money into the government for the investment into our infrastructure, like we've mentioned in this case. 6.6. The location of industrial areas is influenced by a number of factors. Discuss in approximately 12 lines the role of transport and labour in developing Durban as an industrial area. Once again, it's a good idea. Check your mark allocation. They're looking for 6 points here. Now, if you think about it, the location of industrial areas is fairly generic. It's always the same factors that we tick off when we locate an industrial area. We need to have certain things that are always the same. We need to have lots of land. We need cheap land in order to build a really big factory. That land should be flat to make building easy. We need close proximity to water. We need access to electricity. We need access to transport so that we can get in our raw materials and get rid of our finished products to the market. And we need to be fairly close by to a residential area in order to attract labour to work in our industrial area. Now, if my maths is right, that's 6 points. Sure enough, here we have it. A good transport network. The harbour for Durban, now this is where we need to get specific to Durban because that's what the question was asking. So the transport infrastructure we're talking about for Durban is the harbour itself and the railway lines and highways leading into it. The fact that you have got that transport network means that the industrial area is going to thrive. Foreign trade, we're talking about investment and money coming into the area, so Durban is good for that point as well because it's got a close point of reference or access to those foreign areas. KwaZulu-Natal, as a highly populated province, provides the labour for Durban and its industrial area, and the fact that you've got developed or high-level educational institutions like universities and colleges in and around the Durban area means that you've got access to skilled labourers as well. Of course, the rivers in the area, the Eskom National Power Grid, provide those services to our industrial area in Durban as well. So that brings us to the conclusion of our session for today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it's given you the information and skills that you need in preparation for your exam. Have a good day.